They called the planet a gift. That was the word the Veth used when they announced themselves above every major city on Earth. Their ships like vast silver thorns, pressed against the underside of the clouds, their translated voices pouring out of every speaker, every phone, every unplugged radio in a 3-kilometer radius. A gift. The stars had decided humanity was ready. The Veth had come to help them step into the galactic community. All they asked in return was a small thing, a custodial arrangement, a supervised period of development under Veth guidance, perhaps 2 or 3 of their generational cycles, which worked out to roughly 400 human years. During that time, humans would surrender governance of their militaries, their energy infrastructure, and their reproductive planning to Veth administrative councils. Just temporarily, for humanity's own good, they were very clear about that part. The gift lasted 11 days before the first resistance cell fired its first shot. Mika Hall had not been part of that cell. She had been eating cold pasta out of a camping pot in the basement of a decommissioned fire station in Łódź, Poland, watching a cracked tablet livestream the Veth administrator for Central Europe hold a press conference about the upcoming population optimization survey. She was 26 years old. She had a civil engineering degree she'd never used, and she had been in the basement for 3 weeks, because that was where Sergeant Darius Wojcik, her father's oldest friend and the closest thing to a commanding officer the Łódź resistance cell had, told her to stay. She was their comms runner. She knew every back alley, every sewer access, every unlocked maintenance hatch in a 12-block radius. She was too valuable to risk. She had told Wojcik on 4 separate occasions that she was also the best fighter he had. He had told her on 4 separate occasions that this was not the point. 1. The tablet died on the 7th minute of the press conference. Mika sat in the dark for a moment, listening to the building settle. Then she heard the sound that she had learned, in 3 weeks, to treat the way you treat a fire alarm in a building you actually care about. The sharp triple click of a Veth proximity scanner, sweeping a street grid. Close. 2 blocks, maybe less. She was moving before the 3rd click finished. The stairwell was black. She took it by touch, one hand dragging the wall, her boots finding each step without sound. She had done this 17 times in 3 weeks. Body remembered the route the way it remembered how to swim. Not thought, just motion, weight shifting forward, hands reading the dark. She came out through the east utility door into a narrow passage between 2 buildings, and nearly stepped on Sparky. He was wedged against the base of the wall, one foreleg tucked at a wrong angle. She crouched without thinking. He raised his head and showed his teeth. Not aggression, she had learned. Just the Veth-modified reflex they'd never quite bred out of him, the wild animal underneath the experimental plating. His eyes caught what little light existed and threw it back. The bioluminescent nodes along his spine pulsed once, dim amber, and she read it the way she'd learned, to read all his signals. Pain, but manageable. Okay, she said very quietly. Okay. She had found Sparky 8 days ago in the rubble of what used to be a veterinary clinic 2 blocks north. The Vith had been using the building for something. She never found out what. And when they'd left, they had left him. Escape test subject, Wojcik said. A liability, he added. Mika had carried him back in her jacket, which had ended the argument. The Veth called their animal modification program elevational preparatory conditioning. What it had done to Sparky, besides the plating along his shoulders and the nodes, and the fact that he occasionally discharged enough electricity to arc across a 2-meter gap, was harder to name. He was smarter, not trick smart, not treat responding smart. He watched, he waited, he made decisions. When Mika was sleeping, he had twice rearranged the supply crates in the basement so that the heaviest ones formed a barrier against the east wall. The direction, she'd realized later, from which the scanner sweeps always came first. Nobody had told him about the scanner sweeps. She got her hands under him now, and lifted, and he let her, tucking his head against her collarbone, the way he'd started doing 2 days ago, which she refused to think too hard about, because thinking about it made her chest do something complicated. She moved back through the passage, changed direction twice, came out on a street she knew, had no working surveillance nodes on its eastern face, and started walking like someone who had permission to be there. Trick, Wojciech had taught her was to look like you belonged, not confident. Confidence drew Veth attention because confidence implied awareness of one's own presence, which implied the kind of interior life their administrative doctrine classified as requiring management. Su. You looked like a person engaged with something small and personal. Sh. Looked like a woman carrying an injured animal home from the park. She looked like exactly that, because she was. S. The safe house they were using that week was a fourth-floor apartment above a closed pharmacy. Mika took the stairs with Sparky's weight against her chest and nudged the door open with her shoulder, and found Wojciech at the table with 3 other people she didn't fully know, all of them bent over a paper map. They had all gone back to paper. Wojciech looked at Sparky. Wojciech looked at Mika. Scanners were on Traugutta, she said, 2 blocks out. I heard them from the basement. We pulled back from Traugutta 3 days ago, said one of the people she didn't know. A woman with short gray hair and a shoulder that didn't sit quite right, healed badly from something. Then they're sweeping the adjacent grid, Mika said. 2. They do that when they think they've found the edge of an active zone. They walk the perimeter looking for the seam. She put Sparky down on the folded blanket in the corner that had become his spot, checked his foreleg. Twisted, not broken. He'd been caught in something and pulled free, and then stood up and looked at the map. What are we doing? She asked. Wojciech rubbed his face. He was 61 and had spent 30 of those years in the Polish army, and the thing she'd noticed about him in 3 weeks was that he never looked tired until he thought no one was watching. There's a convoy, he said, day after tomorrow. The Veth are moving population survey equipment from the processing center on Piotrkowska to the satellite uplink station on the edge of the city. If that equipment reaches the uplink, they can begin the survey remotely. Without it, they have to come in person, said the gray-haired woman. And they don't like doing that. They don't like being in places where they can't scan ahead. They don't like being somewhere they might get shot, said the third person at the table, a young man who looked barely 18. He said it with more relish than Mika thought was tactically useful. Same thing, the gray-haired woman said, without inflection. Mika looked at the map. The route from Piotrkowska to the uplink station ran along a 4-lane road that went through 2 underpasses and a long curve between an industrial park on the left and a park on the right. She had run that road 3 times in the last week as a courier. She knew every meter of it. I can hit the convoy at the second underpass, she said. Everyone at the table looked at her. I'm serious, I know the sight lines. There's a maintenance access point on the east wall of the underpass. It opens into the drainage tunnel that runs under the industrial park. Go in. I set charges on the equipment vehicles. I'm out through the tunnel before the escort units can reorient. You're not a demolitions operative, Wojciech said. Thomas is. And Thomas can show me how to set a charge in about 40 minutes, I would guess. Because it's not actually complicated and I learned fast. Wojciech looked at her for a long time. She had learned not to fill his silences. Sparky made a sound from the corner. A low, rolling chirr that she'd come to understand meant he was paying attention to something. She glanced at him. He was watching Wojciech. If it goes wrong, Wojciech said, there is no extraction, you understand that. We don't have the people. I know. If they take you, they will process you. The survey. I know what the survey does, Mika said. That's why I want to stop it. He looked at her, the way her father used to look at her when she was 12, and had already decided something, and he was working out whether arguing would cost him more than it was worth. Then he sighed, and smoothed the map with the flat of his hand and said, Thomas, how long to teach her the charges? 30 minutes, Tomas said. She's right. It's not complicated. It took 25. The night before the convoy, she sat with Sparky in the corner, and she did what she always did when she was scared, which was talk. Not about the thing she was scared of. About something small. She told him about the first time she'd seen the Veth ships. She'd been on her roof. She'd been hanging laundry. The shadow had moved across her, and she'd looked up, and the sheet in her hands had gone slack and fallen, and she'd watched it drift down 11 floors and land on the street. And she hadn't moved for about 4 minutes. She told him that. She told him about the sheet. White cotton, a little worn at the corners, embroidered with small blue flowers, along the hem because her grandmother had done that with every sheet in the house, had sat with a needle for hours, and put blue flowers on every hem as if the beds needed to know they were loved. Sparky listened with his head on her knee. His nodes pulsed slowly, blue now, which she'd decided meant calm, content, something in that range. "I'm going to come back," she said. She wasn't saying it to convince him. She was saying it because her grandmother had always told her that saying a thing out loud changed its probability. And she wasn't sure she believed that, but she wasn't sure she didn't. The convoy came through at 9 in the morning, 20 assists behind the schedule. The Resistance had paid someone a great deal to acquire. 3 Veth carrier units. Low, broad vehicles that moved without wheels, suspended on the same field generation technology that kept their ships aloft, flanked by 2 escort units, tall and fast, and bristling with the scanning arrays that could locate a biological heat signature through 2 meters of concrete. Mika was already inside the drainage tunnel. She had gone in at Aero 400. She had the charges, 4 of them. Simple impact trigger packets that Tamaz had pressed into her hands with a seriousness that she appreciated. And she had a flashlight, and she had the knowledge of exactly where the maintenance hatch opened, and exactly where the carrier units would be when she set the charges. She had measured the tunnel. She had timed her own movement. She had a plan. What she had not planned for was Sparky. She became aware of him at 600, when something warm pressed against her calf in the dark, and she nearly discharged all 4 charges at once from sheer shock. She got her hand over her mouth. She breathed. She reached down and found fur and plates, and the familiar shape of him. "How?" she whispered, and then she stopped, because it didn't matter how. He had followed. True, preceded. He had found her in a drainage tunnel, under an industrial park in the dark, and he was here. She stayed still for a long moment. Then she picked him up, gently, the forelegs still tender, and settled him off across her lap, and they waited together in the dark for 3 hours, which was, she would think later, probably the most human thing she'd ever done. Just sat with someone in the dark, waiting, neither of them pretending it was fine. 80856. She heard the convoy. She felt it first. The field generation of the carrier units transmitted through the tunnel walls as a low vibration that she felt in her back teeth. Then the sound. A displacement of air, a pressure change, the hard geometry of the underpass doing something to the noise. She moved. Sparky moved with her. She got to the hatch, cracked it, looked through. First carrier unit was directly above. She worked fast. She had practiced this. She got the first charge up and locked, shifted left, got the second. The escort units were at the mouth of the underpass. She could see the edge of the scanning array on the rear unit beginning its sweep. The lazy rotation that would reach the maintenance hatch in approximately 40 seconds. Third charge. The carrier unit shifted slightly on its field suspension. Some adjustment, some weight redistribution, and the mounting point she'd planned for was 3 centimeters off. She corrected. The sweat on her hands made the lock mechanism resist. She pressed harder. Sparky made a sound. She looked. The scanning array on the rear escort unit stopped its rotation. It was pointed at the hatch. Not sweeping, pointed, locked on. She had about 4 seconds. Sparky went out of her arms in a single motion. She hadn't let go of him. He had simply left. The foreleg, apparently less tender than she'd thought. And through the hatch gap, and she heard the sound she'd heard him make only twice before. A sharp crack, like static discharge scaled up, like lightning deciding to be small and precise. The scanning array sparked. The rear escort unit lurched. An alarm began. Veth alarms were not sirens. They were subsonic pulses that you felt in your sinuses rather than heard. And in the 5 seconds of reorientation that followed, Mika locked the 4th charge. She dropped back through the hatch. She hit the floor of the tunnel, already moving. She scooped Sparky up without breaking stride. He was running toward her, which meant he was functional, which meant she allowed herself half a second of relief. And she ran. The charges went at the 12-second mark, which was what she'd set them for, and the sound in the tunnel was enormous. A wall of compressed noise that picked her up and helped her along. And she thought about her grandmother's sheet falling 11 floors, white cotton with blue flowers, drifting down, and she laughed even though there was nothing funny about it, just The laughter that happens when your body realizes it is still alive and needs somewhere to put that information. She came out through the tunnel exit 6 blocks north, into an alley, into cold morning air that smelled like rain and diesel and the particular smell of a city that had decided not to stop being a city, regardless of what parked itself in its sky. Chick was there. He looked at her. He looked at Sparky. "Equipment?" he said. "Gone," she said. He nodded. Once, that was all. It was enough. She put Sparky down, and he shook himself, plates rattling softly, and then he looked up at her with those eyes that threw light back at you, and she thought about what the Veth had made him into. What they'd done to him in that clinic, what they'd intended to do, what they believed was possible to take something wild and small and wire it into their own purposes. And she thought about what had actually happened. What had actually come out the other end. The Veth had given him power. They had not given him loyalty. Shh. They had not understood that those were different things. They had not understood that you cannot engineer the decision to stay. She crouched, and he stepped into her hands and she lifted him, and he tucked his head against her collarbone, and she stood up in the alley in the cold morning of a city that was still, stubbornly, impossibly, entirely itself. Somewhere above the clouds, the silver ships waited. They could wait. She had work to do.